Our scripture's interesting for today because there's a very particular interaction between one person and Jesus. One particular interaction that doesn't happen very often in the Gospels. Someone thanks Jesus. It's odd, right? That's not a common occurrence. Because through all of the Gospels, Jesus heals people quite miraculously. And while they're gracious, very rarely do they say the words, "thank you." In fact, 10 people are healed in our passage today, but only one says, "thank you." But if I'm being honest, I don't know if I would have been the one to say thank you. And I don't know if you would either. So let us start with our gospel reading today from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 17, verses 11 through 19. Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go, show yourself to the priest." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." The word of the Lord. When you first look at this scripture, it seems pretty straightforward, right? Now, there was one man who came back and did the right thing and offered thanks. And there was 9 others who, to use a common word we might say, were losers, right? They didn't do what was right. They just wandered off without thanking Jesus. But there's a bit of a problem with that understanding, because the other 9 did exactly what Jesus asked them to do. Jesus said, "Go show yourself to the priest." And I have to imagine that as they were walking and as they were miraculously healed, they continued to go see the priest, to do what Jesus told them to do. I mean, wouldn't you too? And not to take anything away from the Samaritan, but the Samaritan probably wasn't very enthusiastic about going to see the priest, because the priests were in the temple. They were the Jewish religious authorities. They weren't his religious authorities. To make a bit of a comparison, it would be like if someone told you to go see the Mormon elders. I mean, yes, the Mormons have a church over there, but I don't know if I'd really want to go see the Mormon elders, right? That's not my church. And it wasn't the church of the Samaritan either. So while this seems pretty straightforward, I can see why those 9 Jews continued and walked to the temple. They probably offered sacrifices in the temple and praised God there for everything God had done for them in their lives. But there's one problem with that, and it's the word probably. They probably were grateful. They were probably thankful. But we don't know that. And Jesus didn't either. If we look at it, we can see how thanking someone has a powerful impact. My wife will tell you, I am no good at writing thank you cards. It's just something that I have difficulty with, sitting down and writing those thank you cards and mailing them off. Does anyone else have difficulty mailing thank you cards? All right, I'm at least not the only one. Now, I know some people now, instead of sending thank you cards, will either call someone on the phone or send a text message, because if you send a card through the mail service, well, it may not get there for a few months. But saying thank you to someone, letting them know that you are thankful for their gift, it has power, whether it's a card, a note, or a phone call. But to get back to our scripture today, we see a bit of the difference in the way that these 9 men approached the healing versus the one. Particularly if we look at when the healing took place. Now, our scripture tells us a lot about the men begging to be healed, and it tells us about the one man returning. But it doesn't really tell us too much about when these men were actually healed. It says that they were on the way to be healed, but it doesn't say that they were close or maybe they were really far, right? Because it's different. If these 9 men took one step in the direction of the temple and they were all healed, and the Samaritan was the only one that said thank you, well, that's a bit odd. But if they walked all the way to the city of Jerusalem, right next to the temple, before they were healed, well, it would make more sense. I mean, that's a long journey, many miles to return to thank Jesus for this act. Also, it's a little odd, the very end of our scripture, because Jesus tells the Samaritan, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." But the problem is, all 10 of these men were men of faith. Because if you had leprosy, you were not allowed to see the priest. You were not allowed in Jerusalem. You were not allowed in the temple. When these men first made their first step in the direction of the city of Jerusalem, they had faith that they would be healed. Because otherwise, they'd walk to the city and they wouldn't be allowed in the gates. All 10 of these men had faith in their healing. Likewise, all 10 were made well. Right? They had leprosy, and all 10 of them were healed. It wasn't just this one Samaritan. I have a friend who is a hospital chaplain in Lexington, and a lot of what he does is praying with people in hospital beds. And sometimes he'll pray with someone, and they'll offer a prayer of thanksgiving, even though they're lying in a hospital bed. They'll thank God for everything that's happened in their life up until that very moment. Other times, he'll pray with people who quite understandably are not very thankful for their situation. I mean, why would you be thankful lying in a hospital bed? They pray and they're angry with God for their situation. They're not thankful. But yet, either way, sometimes their prayers are answered. And quite miraculously, they exit the hospital and continue on with their lives. Which probably brings up the question, why am I talking about prayers without thanks being answered when our sermon series is 3 prayers that don't work? And the title you see in your bulletin is How a Prayer Without Thanks Doesn't Work. So why am I talking about how prayers without thanks can work? And why does our scripture have these 9 men healed, even though they didn't offer thanks? I think it all comes down to that final sentence. The final sentence that Jesus said to the Samaritan, "Rise, your faith has made you well." Those 9 men were able to return to their lives just as it was before leprosy. They worshiped in the temple like they had before. They probably went back to their homes, were with their families. They probably returned to their possibly dead-end job. Everything was just as it was before they got sick. But that one Samaritan who offered thanks, his life was changed. He was made spiritually well. He had a connection with God in the person of Jesus, unlike what those other 9 people had. The act of thanks made him spiritually well. Now, I can't be the only one who's noticed. Recently, it seems like everywhere you go, they ask for a tip, even in places you wouldn't expect it. I picked up my dry cleaning a couple days ago. I didn't have it delivered. I literally picked it up, and they asked me how much I'd like to tip them. We got a vase at St. James Art Fair. We went in there, bought a vase, and on the bottom, as we're checking out, it asked me how much I'd like to tip them for buying a vase. I'm just waiting for a time when I go in for a surgery, and I wake up after the anesthesia, and the doctor has a little notepad. How much I'd like to tip him for his successful surgery. And even though it's getting a bit absurd, I do understand how the act of a tip, how the act of really just a thank you makes a difference. Many years ago, I worked as a car porter on a car lot. So I was the person who got the car that was sold, I cleaned it up real nice, and I handed the keys back to the salesperson so they could hand the keys to you when you bought the car. I was having a pretty bad day because it was pouring rain. And I don't know if you've ever washed a car in the middle of rain, it doesn't work too well. So I had a rag with me, and I was trying to wipe down the interior of the car because I was just drenched from head to toe. I had those little boots on that you put around your shoes to try to keep the interior clean, but it wasn't working too well. Eventually, I get this car in somewhat decent order, and I come in soaking wet and hand the keys to the salesman. And as I turned to walk away, I guess the customer took notice of all of this. And he walked up to me and handed me $2. And I said, I really don't need this. And he said, no, I want to thank you for what you've done. I don't remember much about that job. I really don't. But I remember that thank you. It made a bad day into something far greater. It opened up my heart a little bit. God knows the innermost desires of our heart, but still, when we say thank you to God, it opens up something inside of us. When we say thank you to other people, it opens up something inside of us. The act of being thankful is important because it makes us spiritually well. The reason a prayer without thanks does not work is because praying without a thankful heart, well, it makes you spiritually unwell. So as we continue on throughout our week and as we continue with our series on prayer, let us make sure whenever we pray, we thank God for everything God has done in our lives. Now, church, will you pray with me? God, we want to thank you. Thank you for allowing us to be here in this building, to be present with one another. We'd like to thank you for everything you've done in our lives and you will continue to do. We'd like to thank you for being present with us, even when we're not all that thankful. Lord, We know you know the innermost desire of our heart, but still we ask that we'll have a little bit more of your Spirit. A Spirit that will allow us to say thank you to you, Almighty God, and to those people around us. We pray all of this in your Son's holy and great name. Amen.